as this moment the Trump administration is releasing what the president describes as the transcript of that phone call that launched the Democrats' impeachment investigation. What we now know was a 30-minute call with the president of Ukraine 2 months ago. We've got a team of reporters covering this breaking story, and let's get right to Julia Ainsley with NBC News over at the Justice Department. Julia, let's start with you. What are we learning about this transcript so far?
So, Hallie, we went over the transcript of the call, and we also went over why Justice Department is not going to release that whistleblower complaint. What stood out to me about the transcript is that the president talks about two things explicitly. One is CrowdStrike. He seems to think that the origins of the Mueller probe began in Ukraine, and he wants the president's help getting to the bottom of that. And then he does talk about Vice President Biden and how he used his connections in Ukraine to drop a prosecution into his son. And repeatedly, Hallie, the president talks about the need for Rudy Giuliani and the Attorney General William Barr to get in touch with the president of Ukraine and his prosecutors there to try to get to the bottom of this, to open investigations into CrowdStrike and into the Bidens. Another thing, Hallie, they bring up the issue of this investigation and the fact that they should have this communication immediately after the president of Ukraine says that he wants to continue to cooperate on military funding, on getting military supplies from the United States. But from speaking to senior Justice Department officials, they said that did not rise to the level of a criminal campaign finance violation, that it wasn't something of value, which is in the statute, that you have to get something of value from a foreign leader in order for that to be a violation. And for that reason, they are not continuing this, and they're not going to release the whistleblower complaint. They also say they're not releasing the complaint because it does not fall within the statute that would allow the intelligence communities on the Hill to review it, because this didn't involve a member of the intelligence community, but was rather a diplomatic call. Lots of questions here, though, today about this call and why it doesn't rise to that level, because it is clear from this the president had clear intentions. He wanted this investigation, and he was talking about it with the president of Ukraine. It is possible, though, that he never followed through on that. We asked whether or not the attorney general did actually get that response, whether he heard from the president. And they say that Attorney General Barr never heard from the president or anyone in the White House about investigating, about talking to Ukraine about investigating Biden, his son, or any other matter.
We have a lot to unpack out of that, Julia. And again, just to be clear for our viewers here, this is new reporting that you and our colleagues at the Justice Department have just received. And I want to quote now, before we get over to Kristen Welker and Garrett Haake for a reaction to this, what this transcript, this essentially 5-page call transcript describes, according to your reporting, that the president, I'm just going to read from our notes here, that the president congratulated President Zelensky of Ukraine for his election victory. At some point in the call, the president said these words, quote, "I would like to ask you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it." The president says to Zelensky, "I would like you to find out what happened with this whole situation with Ukraine." The president says, "They say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it." It is not clear what the president meant here. DOJ officials were not able to shed light on it. And then the president says this: "I heard you had a prosecutor who was very good, and he was shut down, which is really unfair." The president says there's a lot of talk about Biden's son. I want to go let me finish this here. I know House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is speaking, but at some point the president says, "Whatever you can do with the attorney general would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution, so if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me." That appears to be at the crux of some of the concern that was raised by this whistleblower. Let me go now to House Speaker Pelosi, who just wrapped up speaking, talking about impeachment very briefly over on Capitol Hill. So, Julia, let me repeat this because I think this is critical. And if we can get our team in the control room to pull this up on screen, I think it's important here. The president says there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, what Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So, again, the president says, whatever you can do with the attorney general would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. That is apparently the only mention in this phone call about Joe Biden. As we said, it's about a 5-page call transcript. The president of Ukraine replies that he's appointing a new prosecutor who will look into this situation. So, Julia, talk through that. An Intel community employee apparently heard about this call from White House officials, and that is what triggered this complaint to the inspector general, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. He heard about this call. He wasn't a firsthand witness to the call, But there were other people who were witnesses. There were note takers, there were officials on the call, just like you see, Hallie, when the president has a call with any foreign leader. They were part of this call, but the Justice Department didn't reach out to them. They say they relied solely on the transcript. I also asked these senior Justice Department officials, did you take into consideration the fact that military funding was being withheld before this conversation, before those words about Biden and the investigation, just like you read there, Hallie? They said they did not take that into consideration, that they relied solely on the transcript because it was the best piece of evidence that they had before them. They also ruled out that the Attorney General did not have the final sign off on this opinion not to release the complaint and not to go forward with any kind of criminal prosecution or investigation, but that he was generally aware of it. So those are a few more details we have. But yes, I'm looking at that same quote. The other thing about that quote is there's an ellipses, there's a ... And I asked, is there something we're not getting there? And I couldn't get an answer to that, whether or not that was just a pause in the call or if there's something they left out. Typically, if they leave it out, they would redact it. But there's a lot of questions about what he is implying here. And then there's some things that seem pretty explicit to me, Hallie.
Thank you for checking out our YouTube channel. Why don't you subscribe? It's really easy. Just click on that button down there. And for more news from MSNBC, click on any of these videos here for the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more videos from MSNBC with our newsletters. Head over to msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up.